it's interesting to see how excited farmers are to start drilling. You know, they were drilling spring barley, spring wheat in January last week. And, you know, while the conditions are good and you're not damaging soils, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about the biology, most of it in the soil will be asleep at the temperatures we've got at the moment.
Yeah, pretty much.
So the hand, oh, where's my thing? Sorry. So the handshake between the seed and the biology and the rooting and the soil is going to take a long time to develop.
Yeah, you know, it's still that thing about sort of, you know, having the cover crops.
Yeah.
Larky. Are we going to end up sort of with a system that's going to be, you know, just having these constant cover crops? I've been reading sort of, you know, very what's the word? Things, contradicting things, like, you know, like on the one hand, yes, cover crops, lots of them. On the other hand, yields with cover crops lower than without cover crops in year one. It's like, you know, it's hard to find the balance, sort of like, you know, without having our own experimentation, I think.
I think you've hit the answer there, because if you look at it, we've spent so long, or the last 30 plus years when I joined the industry, being given silver bullets. You know, we have a disease. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, great shape, thank you. So, you know, you look at it, we've got a disease, we've got a silver bullet of a fungicide, we've got resistance, we've got a new fungicide, we've got a black grass, we've got resistance, we've got a new herbicide, you know, and we've got to stop thinking of that, looking for that silver bullet, and look at a lot more joined up thinking.
Yes, it will be good to do that. So that's why we've got you here as well, you know. we're making one group of microbes. You're gonna make some more microbes, and then.
Now, Adam just told you were desperate for somebody to fill the hour, and the only one he could come up with was me. That's what I heard.
Shh, Adam, that was a secret.
We can fill an hour without anybody.
Yeah, that's true.
It's between me and Judith. Between me and Judith. Doug,
how did the videos go, Adam?
Yeah, it's really good, thank you. We've got 2 done, some photo shoots. It'll be coming out in 2 days.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Well, one of them will.
Yeah.
That's the first time I see the Armid. How you doing?
I used to have hair, Daniel.
I'm used to hearing you, yes.
No, I used to have hair.
You used to.
You've been attacked by the clippers.
Yeah, something like that.
Need some compost extract on it.
That's exactly right. But at least I'm not in a cold house like Adam is.
It's actually underfloor heating, so I don't know why I've got it up.
We like it like this here.
We all do it.
Nice one.
Sounds like a UK hip hop band.
This graph works.
I've just realised today's date is 2/2/22.
Apparently, we've got the next one coming on the 22nd as well.
Yeah. Aye.
And it's a Tuesday.
The Tuesday.
Sorry.
It'd be a palindrome as well.
Sorry. There you go. Making me happy. In 20 days' time, I'm going to be very happy. My what's it called? I can't think today. I'm just going to let John speak.
What would you like to talk about? My shoe size, my favorite food. You kind of gave a very wide.
That's the one. Yes, I'm just going to do a brief introduction for anybody here, basically, who doesn't know you yet. John runs a company called Union Bioscience, and they're looking for alternatives in agriculture, like we do. And he's a right geek. He came over here to play with a microscope, and he spent half a day just riffing with us, you know, about what could be done instead of actually spending the time on the microscope. He's also doing Dr. Ingham's course, so he's with us on that side of things. but he's very, very precise. And so what we are really impressed with in terms of what John's doing is that he just runs a ton of trials, and any claims that people make, he just tests for himself. And so without an introduction, go ahead and say what you make and why do you do that?
Okay, so quick potted history. I came into the industry from the chemical side, working for Ciba-Geigy over 30 years ago. And as that merged and changed, I became an agronomist. And then ultimately in 2000, set up my own business called Plant Science. That was acquired by an American business in 2013. And then in 2017, a guy who I'd known for 25 years phoned me and said, "Hey, what do you think of this idea? We've got some endophytes from the University of Washington." And my first question at the time was, well, what's an endophyte? And as will be the natural question. He said, they're from Professor Sharon Doty. I said, well, okay, who's Professor Sharon Doty? He said, well, he's one of the leading researchers of endophytes. I said, well, what's an endophyte? You still haven't answered that question. So, of course, then we explored endophytes. I'll come back to that one. And then he said they're peer-reviewed at the NASA Ames Research Park in San Francisco. They're on the International Space Station. You've been used by NASA for long-term food production, recycling nitrogen and utilizing phosphorus. And we can have them and develop them for Europe. Are we interested? So we considered it, and like we do with all our offers that we get of technologies, you've got to look at it. One is, what's the peer-reviewable science behind it? Is it credible? And if you look at my experience with biology, there are a gazillion products that work really well in a laboratory or a growth chamber, and there are a gazillion products that don't work when you put them in the field. And that's the biggest challenge that we all face with biology. It's that it's got to be viewed differently to chemistry. You've got to look at how it can integrate with chemistry. And that doesn't necessarily mean pesticides or artificial fertilizer. It could be biostimulants, or how the biology interacts with amino acids or seaweeds or other biostimulants, etc. So we then spent around 18 months looking at the integratability of these bugs and what they would do. They're fully genome mapped, so they've got no mammalian toxicity at all. And when you start to look at the consistency of results that we get, we put them down to the fact that they are endophytes. An endo and phyte in Latin, I'm told, means inside and plant. So these endophytes are bacteria. They can be yeast and they can be fungi, but ours are all bacteria. We do have one yeast in development. They live within the plant. And again, a little bit like the title, if you take endophytes in general, it's like saying a fungicide, for example. There are so many different types. They, as I said, yeast, bacterial, fungal. Some only sit on the leaf surface or the stem surface. Some, like ours, move within the vascular system. So you can apply them on the foliage and then detect them in the roots, or vice versa, put them on the seed, and then they'll colonize the plants throughout. And it's really a case of what those endophytes do, what they bring to the party. All plants naturally have them. So all you're doing, like we've seen over the years with rhizobia inoculants on peas and beans, particularly soybeans in the US and South America, is look to develop and increase the elite strains to be used in those situations. So plants have had these relationships ever since they came onto the earth, as it were. And the classic examples you can see, if you go in a desert, you can go onto an industrial estate and you'll see a building that's falling down, and right out the top of that building will be growing, a buddleia bush. And you see this buddleia bush, it's not a little tiny bush, it might be 3 feet by 3 feet, and you think, where is it getting its nutrition from? How is it avoiding drought stress? How is it tolerating heat? And all these questions, when you start thinking about it, goes, well, it's a great question. Where is it getting all this nitrogen, phosphorus, trace elements from? And it's all being delivered primarily by biology. And so there's a phenomenal link that we have to make between the crops we are growing and the biology, A, that we have where we're starting, and B, where we want to go. So, for example, for me, if you have a soil that's devoid of mycorrhizae, PGPR, arbuscular fungi, etc., making an application of those to crops, however sensible it may sound, is going to be difficult because you're putting those applications into a situation where they're not going to thrive. Otherwise, they'd be there naturally. And so you've got a challenge that you've got to change the environment before you can introduce the biology that's going to live and reside and develop and promote the conditions in the soil. So the short term is, well, how can we do that through the plant? And these endophytes, really interesting because in the pipeline, there are 30 different strains. They've been isolated from willow and poplar that grow in the Sequoia Valley just outside Seattle. So a similar latitude. You're not trying to take a bug from the middle of the Amazon and get it to proliferate in Aberdeenshire, for example. And so what they do, when those riverbeds are dry, those trees still grow, they still develop, they're still able to survive and thrive. So Doty has, for 30 years, worked on these endophytes, taking isolates, refining them down. So after 30 years, we've got to 5 that relatively are in a position for, shall we say, to be commercial, because we're happy with the consistent results. So one of them will fix atmospheric nitrogen. The big question is, well, how much? And we would say between 20 and 40 kilos per hectare. We've got data that shows more, but the sweet spot is 20 to 40 kilos. And that'll vary by the year, by the season, by the soil type, etc., even on your own farm, as would do nitrogen use efficiency. The other strain within the consortia, that will solubilize and sequester phosphorus. Now, the thing that we learned, we only picked this up just over a year ago, is if you take phosphorus, we know, for example, it becomes easily bound in the soil with calcium. So, and again, different forms and different pHs of the soil have different interactions. So, for example, you wouldn't put a triple superphosphate fertilizer onto alkaline soils. You know, it's fine on an acid soil, but don't use it on an alkaline soil because it'll just become locked very quickly. And ordinarily, you know, you might put 100 kilos on, 60, 70% of that will be locked up and bound to the calcium in 7 days. The rest will be gone over the following 2 weeks. And after 3 weeks, you've got no available phosphorus left. So we're pretty good and pretty efficient or have been as a fertilizer industry in digging up rock phosphate, moving it from the area where it's been mined, Morocco or Russia, into, let's say, the UK and putting it onto the Lincolnshire Wolds, where you've got very calcareous soils, and turning it back into rock phosphate. Now, the trick that we've got is you can have a very high index phosphorus soil, but it's not available. And equally, the calcium's not available because it's bound to the phosphate too. So what we've got to look at is how we can develop and evolve the biology in that soil to solubilize that phosphorus, pull it back into the plant and make it available to the crop. Now, the second hurdle of all of that is we know it binds to calcium, the major nutrient in the root structure that pushes and drives the root tip to go through the soil, ordinarily driven either by nitrogen or by water, is driven by calcium. So what you then find is that the phosphorus you've mobilized and brought into the root structure, hey presto, gets bound up with the calcium inside the root structure. So you need to resolubilize it again from the root structure to move it up into the vegetative growth above ground. So there's a lot of complications that we've got to look at when we start to consider how we can increase our fertilizer efficiencies, how we can mitigate the environmental risk. But I think equally at the moment, when you look at the price of those fertilizers, you know, £2 a kilo at the moment for nitrogen, and you look at things like phosphorus, you know, they're very, very expensive. So we need to improve that above the 50 or 60% nutrient use efficiency, which we can do. But it's not going to be a silver bullet that anybody's going to bring in a can. It's going to be working together with the biology, the soil structure, the soil type, the cropping, and then looking at how we can evolve and develop that going forward. So I think there's a lot of knowledge gaps that we are missing. And the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know when you look at biology. And so it's a case of what do I know and how would and could I implement that? So it's a case, you know, a lot of the biology, and you look at some of the products that they've made the press, you know, people are very good at spinning stories. You know, they still can't guarantee that when they put them onto the seed and put it on in the autumn, that they'll survive until the spring. So we've got to look at all the qualities of these biology and the products that are on offer, the bugs in a jug, and scrutinize it as if we were still scrutinizing an artificial input, because you need to know what it is, what it's going to do, and all those relevant components of that. So there's a lot of work that goes into doing that, but for me, it's the most paramount area that you need to look at, because you need to be able to offer reliable and consistent results of the material. I think secondly, particularly when you look at things like nitrogen, so whether you use, compost, you bring your biology in, you bring your nitrogen to the crop, you may add fertilizer, etc. When you got that nitrogen into the crop, the next stage is, well, okay, what do I do to assimilate that nitrogen? If I'm going to bring more in or make it more efficient, how do I assimilate it? And how do I assimilate it more quickly? Because again, free nitrogen in a plant is not good and healthy for the plant. Any excess that's not stored in the vacuoles of a crop will be exuded out onto the leaf surface. That's really attractive for insects, very attractive for pathogenic diseases, because it's their food source, and therefore you can get a very weak, very prone to disease, and allow those diseases to really colonize very quickly and do a lot of damage. So again, it's bring it in, then how do you assimilate it? When you've assimilated it into the crop, how do you then move that nitrogen from where it's assimilated in the biomass through up to the grain? And so I think what we've got to start to look at is joining all these dots together, not just expecting a polymer coated fertilizer to deliver all the nitrogen you've got. Well, okay, it delivers 20% more efficiency, but what do you do with that 20%? Is it going to make your crop lodge? Is it going to make your crop more prone to disease? And the old adage of, well, just put more growth regulator and more fungicide on is probably not where we really want to be going, because we've seen the damage that particularly fungicides, do. And again, on a leaf surface, you look at a leaf surface, it's colonized completely with biology, just like the soil. And so when you put your fungicide on, any biology on there will be impacted, particularly the good fungi that live on the soil. So again, we've got to start looking at what I'm describing when doing presentations as consequential decision making, rather than black and white, I've got this, I kill it with that. So what is the consequence of applying this biology? What is the consequence of tilling this soil? What are the consequences of adding this biostimulant? And look at how those are joined. Because again, when you start to look at things like nitrogen going into a crop, plants always want to maintain a balance of their nutritional status, and that they call it nutritional stoichiometry for the fancy term, but nutritional balance. As soon as you put nitrogen in, it's out of balance. So the first thing that crop will do is say, okay, I've got excess nitrogen. How do I bring that into balance? Well, the first thing it will do is upregulate photosynthesis to bring more carbon in to bond to that nitrogen. Okay, how can I help the plant increase photosynthesis? That will be the question at the key time when you're getting that flush of nitrogen going into the crop. Also, if that nitrogen is going into the crop, you're going to need more potassium to move that nitrogen around the crop. You're going to need more sulfur to bond with that nitrogen to form the sulfur enriched amino acids. So you start to see how all these things are connected. And it's only by looking more at these connections and relating them to what we're trying to do that we can build on where we are today to go forward. Because there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't one solution that you can do that will fix all the problems that we have. So by joining those dots and looking at them as a consequence and looking at them relative to the physiology of the crop at the time you're going to do it or can do it, with the constraints of things like the weather, allows us then to build programs that we can be a lot more efficient with what we've got at the moment than doing it the traditional artificial or chemistry way. And we saw with some of your work last year, Daniel, in the pictures, and forgive me, I don't know the detail, but when you can deliver 80% of what you can do artificially with biology, which Daniel was doing on his winter barley, you go, hang on a minute, we're not far away from where we are today at the moment. And if you look at where we are today at the moment, we've got an average yield, take winter wheat, of about 8.5 tons, which is not going in the direction we want it to go relative to the breeding capabilities, all these super new chemistries, the super new fertilizers, etc. We should be way ahead of 8 tons. But there's reasons why we're not. And for me, the majority of those reasons are biology, and the fact that a lot of the time we spend most of our time killing it rather than encouraging it. So, you know, the products we have are very much driven by linking. I call it chemistry because it's not hard chemistry like pesticides, but it's, you know, if it's an amino acid extract, it's still chemistry, even though it's come from a plant. Looking at how you can interrelate those things with the nutrition that we have or don't have within the soil or the plant, and then how that impacts on the biology. And so, for example, we've got there's a metabolic pathway called the Triolos Pathway, and it's only been around or understood for the last 20 years. And a lot of that work was done by Rothamsted and Oxford University. And they're now realizing this critical pathway operates a bit like insulin in your body. It drives where the sugars go around the plant, particularly as soon as a plant is stressed, boom, it will send a lot of carbohydrate to that area to help overcome it. But if that really means that the sugars are being diverted away from yielding the grain of the crop, then it's a big problem. So we did a lot of work. Originally we did it as a charity project. We hadn't done enough work to launch the project, but a very good agronomist and trials operator, Dr. Chris Green, who ran a company, CMI, unfortunately passed away. And we decided, with the collection of farmers, about 150 farmers that were part of his group, we would bring this product to market. They could buy it at a nominal fee, and then all the money would go to the charity. And we did. We raised about 20-something thousand for it. Now, within that, we then collected all the data at the end, and we looked at the information. And one farmer, he'd done 11 split fields. So you've got to say that's a fairly representative coverage on the farm. And across those 11, he got a plus 0.1 of a ton positive. Arguably not statistical. He said it probably covered the cost of the product, but just. Now, when we looked into that, I said, well, tell me about your nutrient status. He was critically low in manganese. Across all 11. Yes, across all 11 fields, said always critically low. It's our limiting factor. Another farmer rang me up from Boston. He said, you've got to come and look at these yield maps. 1.6 tons in his oats, 0.85 in one field of wheat, and then another field of wheat, he said 0. He said, explain that to me. So I was just fortunate as he made that statement, his father walked through the farm office and he said, and I'd asked him about the nutritional status, and he said, oh, they're all the same. They're all really good silty soils around Boston. We've got plenty of nutrition. And his father just remembered, he said, no, that feels low in boron. And when you go back and you start to look at carbohydrate management, manganese and boron are the two nutrients that drive carbohydrate translocation around the plant. So if you've got a deficiency in those, your carbohydrate management is not going to be great. And therefore, you can put your biostimulant on, you will not get any effect. So rather than just coming now, and so on the label, we've put that on, for example, if you're going to use this product, make sure you've got sufficient manganese and boron. And we even had an agronomist ring, and this gives you an example of the industry, and said, please, can you take that off the label? Because I don't have time to go around and tell my farmers whether they've got sufficiency or not. And I said, no, because that farmer can read the label and go, I've got a manganese deficiency or a boron deficiency. It's telling me not to do it. And therefore he won't be disappointed with the product. So, back to where we were, there's a lot of connections that we have to start exploring and evaluating between nutrition and biology that I think we're starting to understand. The downside is the more you understand something, the more questions you get, and the more it proliferates, and you get to a point of so many questions, you wonder where to start. So as a business, we're data driven. We don't make statements that we can't back up with independent data. We don't do any of our own trials. It's all independent work. And we would like to do that work over, we do it over conventional farm systems, and we do it over regenerative, sustainable farm systems. And I think, again, looking at where the work Adam's doing, what we're hopefully going to do this year, we do a very large block of around, it's just expanded, Adam, so you'll be really happy. We've now got 350 plots in Suffolk. It's normally about 200, 12 by 2 meter plots that we're allowed to use. We're given those plots by F1 Seeds, and F1 Seeds breed wheat and oats and spring wheat. And then we contract out people to spray it and then assess it and harvest it and everything else like that. So we were doing a lot of work looking at that biology. So take, for example, last year, what we see, we split the 200 plots that we had, half with a biological seed treatment, half without. And then we overlaid different nutritional programs and biostimulant programs across those two different systems. Where you didn't use the biological seed treatment, you were 0.3 of a ton behind on every single treatment. So it shows you that, you know, the critical thing with any crop is at that planting and that establishment phase. And if you think the first 30 days of a crop's life, it will take up to 15% of its total phosphorus into that plant. So that little tiny wheat plant that may just be starting to tiller has got 15% of its total phosphorus in. When you think how tall that wheat plant will grow to, you know, a couple of feet tall and all the biomass that goes with it, it's pretty incredible what that little plant's got to do. And we were just saying just before that if you think of planting now into the soil, we're drilling later in the autumn, we're planting earlier in the spring, people are planting, the conditions are great, a lot of spring cereals going in at the moment, spring beans were just being seen on Twitter at the moment, being planted today. And if you look at the temperature of that soil, as soon as you drop below 6 degrees, your P availability drops to 15%. So you've got really limited biology activity able to make that phosphorus available to that seedling that within the next 30 days, and it's still going to be cold by the time it gets to the end of February, requires 15% of that P delivery to maximize its yield. So again, looking at things like the seed treatments to stimulate that is a perfect opportunity of how you can boost your nutrient use efficiency. A lot of people may choose and say, well, I'm going to go with a starter fertilizer, which is fine. And if you put that on, you'll see that boost in the crop growth. You know, you'll look at it and you can split a field and you 9 times out of 10, you'll look at it and go, wow, look what that's done. But if you leave that a month and go back and look at it, you look at that crop and you say, well, they're the same. And what we again need to consider is when we're putting fertilizers onto soil, particularly if they've got a very high salt index, it completely destroys your biology. So that seedling, that little seed is put into the soil, puts out its first little bits of roots and a little start of its coleoptile coming out, and it's got all the nutritional soup it needs from that starter fertilizer. It goes, happy days, I don't need to give the biology any carbon, I'll just grow. So it can grow slightly quicker than the one that doesn't have that nutritional soup, that has to give the soil the handshake with the biology to bring in all these interrelationships of bringing and making the nutrition available to come through the ground. Sometimes that will still happen and be ahead of it. But when you get to, say, take wheat to early tillering, you will find the biological solution is a growth stage ahead of the chemical solution. And that will follow all the way through the crop's life, because those high salt indices really hammer the biology in the soil. And we've seen it, there's a big trend at the moment where people are wanting to use zinc seed treatments. And there's a logic to it because zinc does work as a hormone mimic to increase rooting. Get that? The types of zinc they're putting on their seed are completely high salt index zinc nutrients. Whether they're calibrated the dose rate or not for the seed is one thing, but they certainly haven't calibrated it for the biology in the soil and for the handshake that's required. So when you, and we've done it for 2 years now, when you look at these zinc treatments side by side in a field with, let's say, 10 other seed treatments, it is always the worst looking crop. Doesn't always yield the worst, but it looks the worst all the way through, even than the untreated, because for that short period of time, it completely screws up that association with the biology that seedling requires. So high salt index fertilizers, you put out piling on ammonium nitrate, for example, it's just like putting little bombs on the soil. And again, we've got to look at those fertilizers, how we apply them, how we can protect them from damaging the biology and also being locked in the soil to make them more efficient. The more efficient they are, the less we use, the less damage to the biology. So again, it's joining up all these dots that we're starting to see and starting to make big inroads in, so that we can bring not only just soil nutrition, but we can bring foliar nutrition into play. I'll give you another example. Quite a lot around the world, people use EDTA-based trace elements, normally in specialty crops, because they're quite expensive. And people use them because they tank mix really well. You can put them in with anything, they tank mix really, really well. And so the selling point is that rather than their efficiency. It's a bit like carbonates. You know, people buy carbonate, zinc carbonate, zinc oxide. We paint the Forth Road Bridge with zinc oxide, so you can tell how available that's going to be when you put it onto a leaf surface. Not the greatest material in the world, but it tank mixes. So we use it because of that reason. If you take EDTA, then EDTA is used within industry to break up the calcium and the pectin bonds in leaf structures, to break them apart. Well, if you think of a crop that you're putting these EDTA trace elements onto, and often they're the specialty crops, so your salads, your fruit crops, etc., that cell wall integrity is critical for shelf life, for quality, for flavor, taste, etc. And yet we put this EDTA onto that, and it actually starts to make it the situation worse. So again, we've got to start joining these dots, as I keep saying, of consequence of why am I doing that? What does it mean? If it's tank mixing, okay, that means tank mixing is critical. Can I do it in a better way? If it's making sure you don't degrade your cell wall, then that's looking at it from a different angle. So one that blew my mind, I know I'm jumping around, but I'll give you another example that I still really struggle with in a way, and find it just the amazing world of biology that we live in. We're doing some work with a researcher in Scotland, and he's looking at endophytes on strawberries. And they've refined this one strain of endophyte that lives within the strawberry plant and isolated it down, and they can now, you know, guarantee that this is the active endophyte. That when the plant is inoculated with this endophyte, the strawberry is perfectly formed. When you take the endophyte out, the strawberry isn't perfectly formed. And you go, so a bacteria, I'm not sure, sorry, whether it's bacterial or fungal, but an endophyte living in that strawberry determines the shape and the color of the strawberry. And when they've restaged it further, what they find is that endophyte is making the flower more attractive to the bee. So when the bee lands on the strawberry flower, it spends more time going around dipping its bits in to get the pollination, pollinating more of the little flowers on that strawberry. So when the strawberry forms, it's perfectly formed because it's got better pollination, all driven by biology. So we're starting to see, you know, the next question is, well, what about setting grains on wheat? Is that biologically driven? Is it nutritionally driven? Is it determined by the environment? Is it cold driven that reduces them? You know, there are so many angles that we can look at integrating biology and nutrition together, that the downside is a lot of people jump on the bandwagon for a commercial reason. And I'll give you a good example of that in a minute, without doing the research. But at least it's showing that this biology is so impactful on the crops we grow. We tried one trial last year, completely random, because we had a spare treatment in the trial, and we put the biology on at flowering in the wheat crop, thinking it's too late, it'll have no impact, no relevance at all. It gave 0.6 of a ton response. Now it's only one trial, and so, you know, we'd ignore that and park it till we've got another couple of years. But it's interesting to show that this colonization can happen within, you know, minutes. We do it on seed treatments. You can put them on a damp tissue paper, and you'll see that the treated with the biology, you'll get to what they call the T50, the time for 50% of those seeds to germinate, quicker than the untreated. Well, it can only be down to the biology, because there's only the biology that's the difference between the two treatments. So biology can be really impactful and very quickly. And this is one thing that we were quite surprised at. Go back to some of the others, and, you know, Daniel and the team there will know in terms of brewing up your own bugs. And there's obviously a trend at the moment. I'm going to take my soil inoculant, I'll make my tea, I'll brew it up, and then I'll spray it on my crops. But I come back to, what are you brewing? What are you spraying? And what are you trying to do? And a lot of those questions are not answered by the products that you're being supplied to brew up and then apply to your crops, for example. So we did, a friend of mine's a regenerative farmer in North Lincolnshire. We do a lot of trials work with him, nothing to do with any of our products. And he did 5 split fields of biology versus non-biology. The first challenge, and Daniel will laugh, I know, that when we looked at him brewing it up in his IBC in the farmyard, he got a little fish tank aerator. So there's more bubbles in a glass of champagne than there was in this IBC. So again, he's brewing it up, thinking he's brewing his biology. He's been told this is okay, and off he goes. He then goes and sprays it on these 5 fields. And statistically, in every one of those 5 fields, he's suffered a yield depression. Supposition would say he brewed up anaerobic bugs and that caused a problem. But, you know, we don't know. But he statistically, in 5 situations, he lost yield. His comment was, because he'd been sold to it by a regenerative supplies business, shall we say, or company or advisor, was, well, it's biology. They said it was biology. It should do all these good things. And of course, when you look at that and you say, well, take all, septoria, yellow rust, downy mildews, potato blight, they're all biology, you know. And he said, I never thought about it like that. I just thought all biology was going to be good biology. I said, well, you know, there's another major dot that we often forget. And not only that, if you take things like fusarium in a soil and certain rhizobia that we all automatically think fusarium is bad, or we think rhizobia is good for peas and beans, you can get pathogenic rhizobia, you know, that are not symbiotic with that pea and bean crop. And when you look at that nodule, it's not lovely and pink and it's giving its nitrogen back to the plant. It's a grey, horrible colour, and it's just taking nitrogen away from the plant like a parasite. Equally, you can do the same with fusarium. You can have it in the soil and it can be a real problem, or equally, it can be a real support for the plant as well. So you can't look in black and white and isolation at these things, and that makes it all the more complex and all the more confusing, which then allows people to potentially prey on the opportunity, or potentially people to say, it's too confusing, I don't want to do it, and they don't get the consistent results that they'd like to see. So, you know, if I was starting my career again in agriculture now, like Daniel and the team at their age, it's fantastic. It's so dynamic and going to be so much fun to learn in the next 30, 40 years that, you know, I would find it really exciting, because I think there are the solutions coming. I think the onus is on the advisor and the grower to do his research and to check that what he's being told is true. You know, there's another seed treatment available that they supply, and they say it's got trichoderma in it. That's brilliant because it takes out all the pathogenic fungi. Well, that statement is true, but when you join the dots, trichoderma is like the SAS. It'll go in and take out all the fungi. So there's Adam brewing all his goop up and putting it onto your soil, and then you're going to kill it with what is supposedly a good biological seed treatment. So be very skeptical, as you should be anyway, on any input, whether that's chemistry or biology. Look at it and evaluate it, and it's an evolution, not a revolution, is where I would say. And look at then joining those dots, and you'll get all the aha moments. It's like doing the Elaine Ingham course. All those aha, you go, oh my, why have I never thought about that? Why does nobody ever talk about this? And I think that's why when, you know, Daniel suddenly and Adam, both of the two together, we were supposed to be training me to expand my microscope skills. I think we turned it on and looked at one slide, but the rest of the time was just talking all about the dots that need joining up. And I think that's the beauty of this. It's how we interconnect those comments. And I think my final comment, because I can talk for another half an hour if you want me to, but I'm not going to, because I want to bounce it around, is we all need to do it together. And because nobody's got the one solution, nobody's got the one perfect situation, and we'll all learn together, and sharing it is the way forward. And from our side as a supplier of some biologicals, not the total range of some biologicals, we need to work closely hand in hand as we do with farmers, because when we put it out into the real world, that's very different from trials, and even more different from a growth chamber and a plant pot in a research university. So, you know, you are equally as vital a part of our development system as we are in bringing these solutions to you. It's definitely a two-way street. So I'm going to stop there, Daniel, and let the conversation go in all directions. I think it'll be more fun.
Appreciate you coming here and sharing all this. I've just got one question. Can I go to my local train station and pull all those buddleia roots, grind them up, and have a good yield on my winter wheat, please?
Well, that's where it started, and that's literally what they did. They took the poplar, they ground it up, and then they grew other plants into solutions with no nitrogen, for example, and then put the bugs on. And then you can use radio 50, is it N15, the radio isotopic nitrogen? And again, you use that and you see it being fixed. And then it's a case of just refining those strains down to say, hey guys, this one works. And then, for example, we've got a material that you can spray onto cereals that will control fusarium. And so therefore you reduce mycotoxin production. It does both, because the two are not intrinsically linked. But let's say it reduces DON, mycotoxin production. The next challenge after that is, well, can I have one that's not killed by the fungicide? Okay, we got that one. Can I have one that works in a hot temperature? Okay, you got to select that strain. Okay, can I have one, so there's a lot of work goes through to say, okay, this one has been refined from probably a selection of 10,000 down to the one that gives you that reliability and robustned.
And I think that's very necessary. I've changed my my attitude towards bugs in a jug. I think this work is very needed, but I still believe that we need to have like a total solution. So I believe that having as many of these bugs in the jug sort of researched is important. And maybe 40 years from now we're going to have 10,000 species that they're all going to be produced in a very controlled manner, and we'll be able to simply apply 1,000 at a time, and we're going to have the community that we need, and everything's going to be very well documented, and it has to start somewhere. So we're very happy to say that Sheffield University is starting DNA analysis on our stuff, because we want to know what's in the compost that we're producing. And so, but having said that, I still want to encourage people to literally go into the environment and collect stuff and experiment it with, if they choose to do so, because if this is something that can be done by the farmer, if the farmer has got enough capacity in the day to do that, we're working with nature, and there's still plenty of sort of easy solutions that could be done by the farmer. On the other hand, there's plenty of advice out there who we're not necessarily terribly fond of. So I think we need to have a good grasp on this. And yes, this group of people that joins us on Wednesdays, we're very, very grateful to be in touch with, because they're crazy enough to be open to doing trials with us and doing trials with all these different approaches.
Well, I'll give you another example. There's a product. It's on the marketplace at the moment, this product, and I saw the data probably about 5 years ago, looking at this product, and they claim to have 15 strains of biology, whatever that is, in this liquid that you then apply. So a friend of mine, he bought some, we looked at it, we put it in small plot trials, we put it on the farm, flat, no response on wheat, barley or oats, none at all. And we did this for 2 years and he got nothing. So then they went back and they would talk to the company, and I was kind of in the background, not in the foreground of this. And they took the individual strains out, and then they tried these 15 individual strains on the wheat, barley and the oats in a growth chamber, and just looked at biomass. This was not even going through to yield, just biomass. And if you looked at them, let's take winter wheat, and let's say it was strain 1 to 15. Let's say 1 to 10 worked on the wheat, 10 to 15 didn't. The overall solution and compromise was no effect. When you went to winter barley, it was 3 to 10 that worked on the barley, and then the others didn't. And when you went to oats, it was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that didn't work on the oats, and the rest did. So you got these interactions between the strain and the crop as well. So then this wonderful consortia of 15 bugs that they'd isolated and were going to deliver all this wonderful goodness didn't. It came neutral and flat. So I think I would nearly think the more natural route would be better, than a badly selected collection of strains that are not fully researched and understood, because you could just isolate because they grow better or they survive better as bugs in the jug for practical reasons, the ones that are the least beneficial.
And this week I actually just sat down and finally did a search, and I've got the list. I could share it if anybody's interested. I found somebody did a total list of all exudates, all the substances exudated by barley into the root zone. And so everything that Dr. Ingham talks about, the cakes and cookies, right, that the plant actually exudes. These are all the foods that the plant would be basically putting out to attract and grow the microbes that are supposed to be working with it. And so I'm thinking to myself, maybe there's a simple way, for farmers even, to grow out, beneficial bugs in some form of controlled environments, using compost maybe as the substrate or something like that, where you collect microbes from the environment. So you've got a good collection in that substrate, and then plant your crop into that, and then basically wait for that to finish, and then collect the microbes in one way or the other, basically, and then use that to inoculate the next crop. Because then potentially I say, because this is an experiment in my brain covered with my head, basically just with silly ideas. But potentially this could be a way, just like people grow out mycorrhizal fungi, where they have to have living roots. If the plant is putting out exudates that are specific to the microbes they're supposed to be working with, perhaps that's actually something to consider. And I actually will be speaking to the farmer here on this farm, because he's got a massive pile of his own green waste compost on one of the fields, getting ready to be spread before March planting. And I'm thinking that maybe he should not plow it in this time. Actually leave it on the surface and actually just drill directly underneath that. And we could then come in and spray on top, with our microbes to have a bit of an inoculation, and the plant can choose whatever it's working with. Yep. So, anyways, the point is that to find that total solution, there's going to be much more work to be done. And yes, we are at the beginning of this, and we're very happy to have somebody like you, sort of being alongside this whole adventure.
And I think there's two things: certain key or the predominant exudates, some of those materials we will put in our product to help kickstart that process, to give the plant a kickstart as if there's exudates been put in the field from its roots. The second one, there are some very key stimulants that you can apply to crops to increase exudation and to push out those roots. So if you think of a root,
what are some of these
various acids? So you put various acids into the formulation. Malic acid, for example, is a great one. Humic acid works well. Malic acid.
Malic acid is also on the list of exudates, by the way.
Yeah.
This is the interesting bit, because I read the list of exudates, but there's no proportions on it.
Yeah.
So
and also you would find it's not just the product. If you search down, they've then got to put a price to that. And that's where commercial comes over the technical. And you go, okay, what are these exudate? These materials are affordable and easy to access and put into a formulation. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but there is the list there that you can do. And that's what, if you look at a lot of the polymers that make fertilizer polymers, they're all acid based. Itaconic acid's a great one, for example, that you can coat a fertilizer to keep that availability high. Humic and fulvic acids. Fulvic generally is more effective, more soluble, more available, but it's more expensive. So that's why people will often then go down the humic route and put a balance on, because the humic is not quite so good, but it's a lot lower price. So there's
I've got a question actually regarding humic and fulvic acid, because you're deep into that as well. When I was reading about humics and fulvics, it's basically sort of a jumble of carbon atoms in very big molecules, and it's difficult to sort of realistically put a formulation on what is humic acid, especially what is fulvic acid. How do you find sort of the products on the market? How can you sort of tell what's a good product and what's not a good product?
I think there's two things. One is you could test all the physical properties, you know, pH, solubility, etc., like that, and that gives you a guide. And I think ultimately you've got to run a screen and you've got to test them. So again, I'll give you an example. There are probably two amino acid products. We'll call them all plant-based. So we'll take any, you know, animal, plant. It's all plant-based in the UK at the moment. One of them won't even tell you what's in their product in terms of concentration. One of them does, and then and we were asked by a company, could we create an amino acid product for them? It's not really our area of specialism, but we did anyway, because that was, you know, what a customer demanded. When we analyzed these other products, probably the market leader at the time, which it's not now, and you'll see the reasons, was a 230 gram per litre product, and they were charging £10 a litre. The next product that came in and attacked it was saying, well, we're only £7.50 a litre, and therefore you should use ours. And they gained quite a traction. They have 75 grams in their product. But of course, they say you need to put 2 litres on. So by the time you put 2 litres over the 7.5, you're paying 15 for what you were, you know, for even less than you were with the tenner. So we looked at this, and we came out and we looked at this and we said, okay, this is a value for money option for the farmer. He's got to buy the right amount of aminos at the right price. So you look at the fair position, and we can deliver 420 grams for £10. So we're half the price. When you run it in the trials, and we've run this for 3 years before we launched, they all perform the same. You could argue one was better than the other, and I would say you would argue ours is, but I'm not, statistically, there's no difference. And so it's purely, the problem there is that farmer is being asked to pay for something, he doesn't know what's in the can, so until you analyze it, well, that's just voodoo. And snake oils that exist in the ag market only exist because farmers buy them. There's no compulsion that a farmer has to buy a snake oil. It's only a snake oil because a farmer buys it. And if they did do the research and look into it and go, do you know what? No, those snake oils will go out of business. And that's a very harsh thing to say, but, you know, collectively here, you're looking at an enlightened group that are looking for the attention to detail. And this is the attention to detail that you need to go into and say, well, okay, prove that statement. And you've seen at the moment, the regulations are changing. The fertilizer regs change in June this year, and biostimulants will come under that. And there's a biostimulant company in the marketplace saying, these regulations are terrible. They're going to stop innovation. They're going to hamper farmers, etc., etc. Absolute nonsense, because the regulations that will come in will say, you've got to say what your product is. Great. Every farmer deserves to know what's in the can. Second, if you make a statement about that product, you have to have data to prove it. Well, that's only fair as well. You know, if you buy petrol from a petrol station, I expect it to run my car, you know, and I'm sure if I go back to Shell, they'll be able to prove that. And so the companies that are squealing are clearly the ones that feel that they haven't got the data, because it's not an onerous task in terms of cost, which is that's their other excuse. So they're frightened of it because they're going to get exposed. And for my view, that's rightly so.
So what's, do you know of any details you can share in terms of the change of the regs? What is it doing?
Well, at the moment, for example, if you follow it to the letter of the law, you've got fertilizer regulations and you've got pesticide regulations. They're the two splits. Mm-hmm. At the moment, where do biostimulants fit? That's then not an EU level decision like the fertilizer and the pesticides. It's at a national level. So then every country has its own rules. The UK has rules are based more on the market will decide if you've got a good product or not. You go to somewhere like, for example, Belgium, and it will take you 2 years to get a registration for a biostimulant. So they're very, very different. And these new rules won't necessarily harmonize everything. So don't get excited that it will. So overall, it will be for the better, because if you get it registered in, let's say, Germany, then Romania will recognize that and you can go and sell straight away into Romania, but not guaranteed. So it will just help identify, A, what the product is, and you have to validate the claims that you make for it, which is a big step forward.
Yeah, makes sense.
And go back to you know, if you look at the varieties that have been bred, and I heard, and I can't prove this statement, so don't hold me to it, but I heard a statement the other day that the last variety of wheat bred that had good biological connectivity was Avalon. And I think you're going back 20 plus years for that variety. And so the modern varieties are not bred with their nutrient use efficiency, their biological interconnectivity, etc., into that system. So to suddenly go, I don't want to grow with anything, you may, like we're seeing with growers, either look for blends or older varieties. You might do better to go that natural route with older varieties than you would do with some of the new varieties.
That's interesting that you say that, because we've recently had a colleague in the Netherlands basically have a failed maize crop with biology, where the entire field grew the cover crop very well, but the maize didn't take at all. It was basically a lost crop. So it's and another friend basically suggested it was down to that, and we don't yet know exactly, you know, because we don't have the data to support any of these claims. Any questions from?
I'll just throw one more into that one, because you talk about maize, and if you look at the way people grow maize, it's a very hungry crop for phosphorus. So we put on a lot of compost, we put on a lot of manures, maybe a starter fertilizer, maybe phosphorus, TSP, DAP, MAP. That one of the, then look at the next limiting factor, if you've got high P soils like that, is the limitations of zinc. So you then might find that the limiting step is the availability of zinc, and a small amount of zinc can alleviate that. So you've got to look at this nutritional, biological interconnectivity and see to look at what's going on, like you are doing.
What I'm really interested basically is to have, you know, all of these nutritional pathways basically opened up with biology.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this is why we're going down the DNA analysis route, because we like to basically have that picture. We just want to know if all of the elements are actually present and active.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go too far, because we're actually bumping against the end of the conversation, and I just wanted to see if there's any questions. Judith's got a question. Go for it.
Well, you know how you're saying about the different varieties of the same crop, like old corn has better biological connectivity. So if you've got different varieties of the same crop, and you're trying to say that it has to say different varieties are going to be potentially have different results as well. So you're going to have to be really careful as to which wheat you're using or which barley, and not presume that they're all the same. So that's actually going to make the whole thing even more complex.
And I'll throw in another statement for you. If you grow two varieties in the same field side by side,
yeah,
and let's say you know the potential of those two varieties is different. So one's going to give you a 10-ton crop, one's going to give you an 11-ton crop. If you then go and analyze the biome of those two varieties, they're completely different. And what you will see is that, particularly from an endophyte perspective, the more successful the crop will select the more successful endophytes to produce that crop. And that makes a lot of sense, because if you think endophytes live within the plant, they go right the way through into the grain. So then when that seed is then put back in the ground, hence why I'm a real favorite of farm safe seed. You can do so much to improve the quality of your own seed grown on your own farm. And there's an old phrase in Lincolnshire that says, you always buy your seed from within the county because it's similar soil structure, and your wife from without. And that's the phrase that they use in Lincolnshire, which probably holds true. But again, you know, you're looking at those associations, and you're looking at that picture of what's in your soil to build that seed. So is the endophyte selecting the seed to help proliferate the endophyte, or is the seed selecting the endophyte?
Yeah.
That's a great, we'll probably never know that one.
Mm-hmm.
Ask a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Ingham's overarching theory is that a biocomplete compost connects with Sparks' theory of infinite minerals in soils. End of story. Before you answer, John, I would say that's not that's not wrong. I think this is what we're working towards. My hypothesis is that in most soils the microbes are not there, and we need to have the right community to connect all of these elements. What would you say, John?
I totally agree, and I think, you know, I don't know if you've seen that picture going around. It was on Twitter, I think, a few weeks ago, of the guy that grew the glass jar, the garden in the glass jar, and it's been going for about 45 years, and it's completely sealed. And I think if you've got it all in balance, that statement is totally true. Throw it back. How many composts have you seen, Daniel, that you would put into that category of being a good compost?
Well, yeah, exactly. This is the point. And we also, you know, what we're actually starting right now with Sheffield, for instance, Sheffield's doing a very simple baseline analysis for us of survivability of our microbes in poor soils. And so even, you know, Dr. Ingham in the course, as you remember, will quite often say, it's not about, you know, having the compost and applying it. It's basically having the compost, applying it, and then measuring the microbes in the soil. Yeah. And if you don't actually get the result of, you know, of at least those functional groups in the soil, then you still failed. So this is basically, you know, the tragedy of this is that we're working from this handicap situation where, you know, we're basically starting from scratch, and then we're trying to find that new balance.
And it's interesting because last year I did some trials for the Biodynamic Gardening Association, and, you know, even bizarrely, you know, planting seeds relative to the moon, the difference was 50% with my fennel, and they were only planted 5 days, sown 5 days apart. And it was interesting, the one that was planted 5 days sooner, so it was up and through the ground quicker, was the one with the smaller growth and biomass, because it, according to Charles Dowdy, you know, it wasn't the right time to plant it, and so it proved. If you look at some of the others where you can get that nutritional balance right, I had no problem with, for the first time ever, with cabbage white butterflies on my brassicas. I go on holiday, don't spray, and keep the balance of the from what I was doing on the crop right. Bang, when I got back, it exploded. So again, because I wasn't able to deliver it at the moment through the soil, and I was having to make, you know, exogenous applications to the crop, that's fine as a temporary, but the ultimate gain is you've got to do it through the soil. So compost is going on, but then the question is, well, how good is my compost? Right. You know, you put the goop on. Well, I know how good the goop is, but how good an environment have I put it into to survive?
Right, that's it.
How many times do I need to apply it? Oh, don't know yet. You know, so there are so many caveats that we need to explore, or areas that we need to understand.
One example, for instance, is flagellates. So you can apply a compost, it has flagellates in, but if the field doesn't have the right ecological situation to support them, they don't take to the field, and you're going to have to wait a couple of years for the structure to be built in order for sufficient soil pore space to support those flagellates and their behavior. So there's a little caveat for you on one tiny group, but this is going to be true across the board, I think.
This is something that I'd like us to solve by having a product of encysted flagellates that can survive conditions until the conditions are ready. So you can actually put them out, because we have brewed excellent compost teas, you know, with 1.5 million flagellates per mil. And then you put it out, and then you can check the soil. There's going to be none left because it was dry and they just popped, and nothing will stay. I like the comment by the Armid. Nice one, saves me buying anything. I just need to be sure of the compost. That's as simple as it is and as complicated as it is.
Well, but the point is that, and I'm not insulting you here in any way, but you guys have got
it as an insult, no.
Job to do in order to sell a product. And you're going about it the right way. But I mean, John, you're talking about farmers need to do their research before they apply the product. What sort of lunacy do you think a statement that says that farmers do research? Oh. Farmers don't do research.
Yep.
They just speak to the agronomist, and the agronomist says, put this on.
Yep.
And they hope that they make money. Farmers, there's not farmers here. Look at the people that are here. We've got a handful of weirdos. We don't have all the farmers.
early adopters, Jeremy. I call them
Early adopters. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Euphemisms. That's much better.
I do early adopters.
I agree with you.
There you go.
Don't disagree with you.
But it's this is why I also said that, because one of the premises of Dr. Ingham's first presentation, that is widely available, the 2015 Oxford Bureau Farming Conference, is that it's so simple that just get good compost and spread that, all your problems go away. And looking at how actually farmers approach this whole thing, and basically one of the first people I spoke with, an apple grower, basically was looking to suppress weeds with compost, but then he was spraying glyphosate, the same compost, at the same time, and killing the microbes that would potentially be suppressing weeds, and then following that compost application with an entire season of fungicide application, which will further decrease the amount of fungi that are supposed to be suppressing weeds, because that's the only thing that is capable of suppressing weeds in the compost. And so the main thing that my main assumption is here, with you guys, we're having fun and we're riffing and we're basically, learning together. But the majority of farmers need a total solution and somebody knowledgeable enough with all the data to do that. The statement, if the farmer does the research, it's kind of like, having an awareness of what's in the market, and then having enough agronomists who work with this and giving the agronomist an incentive to work with this. That's another story. The farmer here on our farm uses an independent agronomist. And so the independent agronomist makes his own mind, right? He's not supposed to be swayed by, anybody, not us and not the chemical producers. So it's a very complex ecosystem of services and products, in the country, and it's going to be a hard slog for any properly biological system, to be able to actually come out on top and actually be able to provide the value to the farmer and fix all the problems that the chemical agriculture brings in. So it's a massive challenge.
It's going to be huge, because there's going to be a lot of mistakes made along the way, and those mistakes are going to put both the farmer who's suffered it and all these neighbours and friends round about. They're going to say, oh well, this regenerative stuff doesn't work. Yep. And kind of retract from the whole thing. I was in a farm walk last week, and they tried to turn whole estate regenerative in one season, and I mean, it was ambitious and but actually really rash at the same time. Yeah. And they did say they had problems at calving time and with at lambing time, but because of my physical abilities, I was in a buggy with some of the stockmen being taken round, and I actually heard what was going on. And it was the most serious animal welfare disaster, which we had actually heard from somebody else in the district before I even went. So I kind of knew what I was looking for, but I mean, in this meeting about regenerative farming, they said, oh, well, we did have some problems, but we've kind of got there. They hadn't got there at all. They had a disastrous calving. We can't afford that as producers. Yeah. And if we, as Daniel knows, I've started with a field and 2 or 3 trial plots in different corners of the farm, trying different things out. And I've spent 2 years trying to learn as much as I can before we do anything on any scale whatsoever.
This is it.
It's not tried to do it in 6 months.
Yeah. It's important to basically, for the farmers who want to sort of be the pioneers, they need to be protected. And I've started sending emails to this group of farmers, asking them to do commercial trials with us on winter crops. And the biggest awareness that basically is in the back of my head about all of this is that if they lose 50% of the crop on 5 hectares, that's 3,000 to 5,000 pounds. And so it's a massive responsibility, and we have to know what we're doing. before we go to it. And this is, the Armit, you've been organic for a very long time. You've got a very well protected, very well developed system, as you told me in one of the earlier conversations. And so, you're not looking at, the same problems, as the conventional farmer are looking in terms of conversion. And, if somebody is to help these people to convert, they have to have a massive backlog, or not a backlog, a massive database of successful conversions on smaller areas before they can actually, offer something bigger. And that's going to require a lot of money, and that's going to require a lot of work. And what I keep telling people is that nobody basically has asked any diesel drivers to convert their cars to electric because it's good for the environment or it's good for their bottom line. Nobody's asking people to do that. They're waiting for proper manufacturers to come up with a good car or a good truck that's going to do the job and it's not going to break the bank. And I don't believe this whole transition to proper biological regenerative is going to happen completely bottom up. I believe the bottom up is important. I believe that what early adopters are doing is absolutely necessary. But for the widespread adoption, it's not going to happen from the bottom up. I don't think so. It's just too much of a responsibility to put on the backs of people to do it themselves. There are magicians, and I talk about compost makers, right? Compost for a lot of people is like art. And you look at Adam, he's an artist. My job is to take his artistry and write it down. So I force him to write everything down. And then Paula comes in and I ask her to try and make sense out of all the data that we've written down over the last year so that we can, nitpick and find things that work so that we can scale it up. All of this requires a lot of work. All of this requires time and people and money.
And for people to sort of engage with it, and we're going to need consultants and people who understand it. Those consultants are going to need a huge amount of training and a huge amount of experience. And that's a long, slow job. And it ain't going to happen in 5 years, let alone 10, or 10 years, let alone 5. But I mean, it's going to, there needs to be early adopters, yeah. But I mean, and sharing that information, sharing that experience. But the likes of, for me, I'm beginning to realize how important it's going to be for me to be able to assess our own biology as we go. And like from the compost that I've got, and then not only that, but once it's in the soil, is it still there? Has it lived? Is it operating? A month later, 6 months later, whatever. And that's more skills that the man on the ground or somebody local, it's maybe not the man or woman on the ground, but somebody local is going to need, because sending it away and doing all that, sending it all away and paying for all of that, it's unsustainable. It's something that we can't all do.
That's a good point. And it would be nice if there was a simple solution. It's like this microbiometer, that some people started using, and I'd love this thing to be properly calibrated so that you can just sort of have a kit and have a response in 10 minutes for 10 quid. Once somebody comes up with something like that, I'll tell you. I'd love to use it myself.
But again, Daniel, if you think about that, the farmers are already sending away for soil analysis for fertilizer testing. That was developed by the fertilizer companies to sell more fertilizer. And if you look at a lot of the tests that they are doing, they're a complete waste of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
NPK and pH, what does it tell you? Absolutely nothing. So, so you're better off doing a little in a lot more detail and applying it to a wider area than doing a lot in very little detail and saying I'm okay, because you really don't learn or know anything. And I think as it evolves, these things will evolve with it. But again, like everything, you always got the person that jumps in first. Well, I've got the best test and it works and does this. Well, actually have you? But it will come with it. I'm pretty sure it will. If you look at, and benefits have been with working at Los Alamos National Laboratories in the US. They've got machines that they can run over the ground, which they've done on Mars. That's where it came from, where you can do an instant scan of nutrition. Well, if you can scan that on a lower scale, what happens when you scale that up? Now can we go and scan biology?
That would be
We've
nice.
not even thought about it at the moment, but I'm sure these things will happen.
That would be nice. Dr. Ingham has got this dream about sort of having a Star Trek style tricorder pointing into the ground and giving her a result.
Yeah.
She mentions that several times now. Anyways, any more questions from the audience, because we run over?
No, still got work to do.
We're in that club.
I had one thought. John, if you have time, would you mind spending 30 minutes with us and Judith to try and steer her away from buying stuff that might not be useful for her? Because she was just talking about that last week and we didn't get a chance to go over anything this week. But yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Don't do it, Judith. Don't buy a thing.
No. That's the premise you should work on.
Snake oil.
Don't buy it to start with until you've got enough data to improve it.
Just use my own stuff.
Yeah.
Judith, she's high up on the leaderboard, the compost leaderboard.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's what got me into it. I did this 4 years ago. Was it 3 years ago? 3 years ago, and I made some what looked fabulous compost in the garden. Could I get a seedling to grow? Could I want to put it on the garden? Would the plants take and grow? Not a chance. It was a disaster. So I said, hang on a minute. I've got to understand this better than I do now.
Yeah, I've done that before. I've killed everything on a couple of raised beds, and then last year it worked out. But did you manage to repeat it, having done it once before? I'm a bit worried about trying to get stuff tested again this year, because I might end up at the bottom.
Well, I do I do the Elaine Ingham composting, I do Johnson Sue, we do the wormeries, etc. So I do a whole mishmash at the moment. And then when I eventually get to finish off my microscopy course, then I'll be able to know what to look for under a microscope. Maybe I'll come back down and see Daniel again and finish off my training on a microscope. And I think that's the key thing to do. Every farm should have a microscope.
We're going to get to that, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're going to have to. Yeah.
Well, you can't send it away. I don't think the results are. Is it fair to say the results are not reasonable if you send it away down to the lab?
You can't even send a soil sample away and do mineral analysis and get a consistent result back.
We've had many conversations about this with Dr. Ingham. She's relatively confident that you get similar results. We've had samples sitting about also for a day. We didn't have a problem with that. It depends how it's packaged as well. If you just squeeze out all the air and it's just basically sitting in a warm van, then you're gonna have a much different result. I have got this one dream, for the future, where I've got a van with a little lab set up, and I just go to you, and I just basically go to you and all the neighboring farms, and we just do it on the spot, and then you don't have any delay. And so if a farmer doesn't have it, then basically we'll have a van solution like that.
If I've got my compost and I've sent it away to you, and the results have come back and it's good, then I want to make a compost tea from it. So I put a kilo of it in my water butt and put some air through it for 24 hours. I need to measure that tea.
You have to. You can't send it off.
If I've got it wrong, I need to dump that tea and then do it again and find out what I made a mistake.
Yep. You can't. This is it. But you're an early adopter. You want to do it yourself. Go for it, and we'll support you all the way.
But everybody needs the feedback loop, and the feedback loop has to be.
You need to have that microscope for sure. If you want to do it with biology, you need to have that microscope. That's the bottom line.
You're bloody far away though. That's the problem.
Sorry. I'll tell you what. I can also help you a bit. If you were to get yourself a microscope, and we can do a bit of a Zoom stuff. But if you were to come over here, obviously, we could do it on our own samples. Maybe, perhaps this is another thought. You get a microscope, and we basically sell you a little kit of our stuff, and we send it over to you, and then you can see what these things look like.
As you said in your kind of pitch, it's more than just microscopy. the conversation would be really important. So I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and go to England, and I just don't want to do it.
And spend money. Come on.
Go see the enemy.
Maybe I might need to join you, Dermot.
But then we all need to go to Doug to try that whiskey of his.
Yeah, well, and the gin. They were doing gin first, weren't they?
You're muted, Doug.
Yeah, gin and vodka first, whiskey to follow. So, although I feel a bit ashamed talking about whiskey in front of so many people from north of the border.
No worries. Right, folks, I need to head.
Yeah, I need to go.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Thanks,
That
John.
was-
Thanks very much.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much.
No worries.
All right.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys.